Okay, well, this is sort of a impromptu follow-up on the last video I put on my profile regarding the Federal Reserve. And one point I wanted to make was the fact that I made a little bit of a mistake in describing the original seven members of the Federal Reserve. And I thought this was important to go over quickly again, because for people to realize that how much the Federal Reserve does trickle down to their daily lives, because they're the ones that cause the inflation. So when I started to describe the original seven members of the Federal Reserve, you had number one, Nelson W. Aldrich. He was the Republican whip at the time. Number two was Abraham Piatt Andrew. He was the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury at the time, and I think last video I had said he was an Assistant Secretary of State. What I meant to say was that Abraham Piatt Andrew was the Assistant Treasury Secretary. Then number three, you have Frank A. Vanderlip. He was the President of National City Bank of New York at the time. Number four is Henry P. Davidson Sr. He's a partner of, or he was a partner, a senior partner of the J.P. Morgan Company. Number five was Charles D. Norton. He was at the time president of J.P. Morgan's First National Bank of New York. Number six is Benjamin Strong. He was head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. And number seven is Paul M. Warburg. He was a partner in the Kahn and Loeb Company, and also a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France. And the Creature from Jekyll Island book also goes on to say that he was also brother to Max Warburg, who was head of the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. So this serves as an important model that we can look back on. A lot of this information, according to the Creature of Jekyll Island, so far, there was mention that G. Edward Griffin, in doing his research, looked at the memoirs of these seven individuals. So it's important to note that this model should not be forgotten, because I think this represents the number one, the political side and the financial side, and also, if you will, the financial side in partnership with the governmental side. That continues to today. That model serves as something that continues to this day. And from what I understand, the Fed has definitely evolved to encompass, I guess, more things. But what you want to remember, I think, when watching these debates, or what I try to remember, is to watch these Republican candidates, and most of them, as I said before, are just pandering to the people to get into political office. They're not doing it for the sake of, I think, wanting to correct the ills of the economy. And I made some statements about that earlier, about what Perry said about making treason, Ben Bernanke acting in a treasonous way by printing up so much money, and Michelle Bachmann making the statement that she would not reappoint Bernanke if she were president, which of course that's not going to help the matter, because, as I said before and other people have said, it's a systemic problem, a systematic problem that needs to be addressed, and it's not going to be addressed by not reappointing Ben Bernanke. It won't matter, because the system will still go on. So a full audit of the Federal Reserve has to happen. This is vital to correcting the ills of the economy, to looking at the source of the problem rather than the symptoms, which is what all these people are doing. You You and I can't suppress the market. The market is always going to win out. The problem is that when government tries to suppress the market, we get all these dysfunctions and distortions in the economy, and it causes the depressions and the recessions not to heal correctly, not to be addressed and confronted. So, for instance, with Herman Cain, who was another one who I made mention of, who was not really addressing the problem, he talked about the Federal Reserve, but only limiting their role. He didn't talk about a full audit of the Fed. And a partial audit has already revealed, as I said before, and many have said before, it's already revealed that the Federal Reserve Bank in the last couple of years has spent $16 trillion loaning that apparently out to banks, central banks around the world, and to different countries. So why was this money loaned out? If you think about it, we're $14 trillion in debt. So why was this money, that amount of money, loaned out, and where did it come from? I mean, I don't think is there a possibility that $16 trillion of treasury bonds were sold to and bought up by other countries around the world? That seems to me to be highly unlikely. So most, if not all, of that money had to be printed out of thin air, which causes the whole inflation process. So the market can't be suppressed, otherwise it will be hampered, and you see what happens and what has happened and continues to happen. So with Herman Cain, he has not called for a full audit of the Fed, but then has kind of flip-flopped on the issue, and this can definitely be addressed in a YouTube video here that's illustrates this perfectly.
Some people say that we ought to audit the Federal Reserve. Here's what I do know. The Federal Reserve already has so many internal audits, it's ridiculous. I don't know why people think we're going to learn this great amount of information by auditing the Federal Reserve. There's no hidden secrets going on in the Federal Reserve to my knowledge. And I tell people, you know, we've got 12 Federal Reserve banks. You find out which district you're in, call them up and go from there. We don't need to waste money with another commission or an audit that's not necessary. You're listening to the Neil Boortz Show, and this is Herman Cain. I am thankful to Representative Ron Paul for his consistent and steady pressure on the Federal Reserve. And as chairman of the Subcommittee on Domestic Monetary Policy, he will have the oversight of the activities of the Federal Reserve, including the ability to require an audit of the Federal Reserve Bank. Congressional oversight, and not more commissions appointed by the president, will bring more accountability to the Federal Reserve on behalf of the American people.
Okay, so you can, if you could hear that, you can kind of see there that he flip-flopped. He was saying one thing and then the other, and I think this all has to do with, again, just to reiterate, it's just like Perry or Bachmann or any of these candidates. Newt Gingrich has talked a little bit about the Federal Reserve, talking about how there's been problems since the 90s, and of course there's been problems much longer than that, all along really, I think, since the inception of the Federal Reserve, and things have only grown and expanded and evolved. So make sure when you're watching these candidates that you consider that, and Ron Paul has been the only person that is calling for a full audit of the Federal Reserve and an ultimate end to the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve, like any company, like any private company, which is basically what it is, it can go back to the private sector. And you can compare it to any company that is a private company that doesn't get bailouts and stimulus packages given to it from money printed up out of nothing. No company deserves privileges granted to it like that, like the government gave to and continues to give to the Fed. it looks the other way. The Congress looks the other way. This kind of a thing only hurts the economy, and until that's recognized, none of these situations are going to stop. That is one way that the Fed, I think, could be ended, is it could go back to the private sector. So make sure to co-sponsor, I think it's H.R. 459 and Senate Bill 202. And call your congressmen and representatives and urge them to co-sponsor this, because without it, the economy is not going to change. One thing that I would like to add in closing, and I probably mentioned this before, and this is pretty important, that if in reading that you do, you'll find out that Presidents Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, they all tried to have money issued that was in competition to the Federal Reserve. And this is very important to illustrate and continue to emphasize to people and what this means to them in dealing with dollars, because we all deal in dollars. You and I do, and it's basically the reserve currency of the world. So, and the only entity that issues those dollars is the Federal Reserve, and they have a monopoly. They're granted a monopoly by law that only they can issue money. And this is very important because, again, it goes back to emphasizing what a free market means. That is not exemplified or an example of the free market. I mean, we I think do have free market economics on certain levels in the United States, but overall, I'm talking the fact that a central private entity can issue the money, and only they can issue the money, that's trying to suppress the market and control the market. As I just mentioned, no private company is supposed to be granted. That's those capabilities. That's an uneven playing field. So keep that in mind, that those three presidents were trying to have it where there was competition in money, and that somebody else could issue interest-free money. And so remember that when you call your senator or congressman and tell them to endorse H.R. 459 and Senate Bill 202. Okay.